looking at the book of Exodus. I hope you'll enjoy that series, and I'll be kicking it off next Sunday here at the Village Hotel. Great. Well, now it's my pleasure to introduce Lauren Windle, who's our guest speaker this morning. Come on, Lauren. Give me a welcome.
Hello. Oh, thank you.
I'm so excited that Lauren's agreed to come today, and just to explain, I first came across Lauren actually watching a TED Talk that she did not far from here in Guildford at Surrey University, and it was Lessons You Can Learn from a Drug Addict. And I have to tell you, that title got my attention. And do you know what? I actually learned a lot, which is one of the reasons I've invited Lauren. Lessons You Can Learn from a Drug Addict. So I've since seen Lauren speak at New Wine. New Wine is a big Christian, charismatic, mostly Anglican conference. She spoke there last month. And so I was really blessed by her ministry. So I'm really excited that Lauren has been able to join us this morning, and I hope that, seeing as she's new and has not been before, that you will join me now in giving a massive, warm Beacon Church welcome to Lauren Windle.
That was a really big round of applause. I really hope I live up to that. I feel like maybe it should have come at the end, you know, once you'd decided how much enthusiasm to throw into it. I'm just going to start by praying. Lord, how fun that I get to share a little bit of the journey that I've had with you, with everyone here. And I just pray that your words would fill this room, and that everyone would be in the right place to hear it and receive it this morning. Amen. Right, so a bit of a spoiler alert for the content of this talk. I am a drug addict. I don't know if that's the right... In fact, I said that recently to a friend, and they were like, no, you're a recovering drug addict. And it's actually really important to put that distinction in place. But I'm a recovering drug addict. And I checked on my phone just before I came up, and I've been sober for 2,700 days today. Thanks. That actually translates to about 7.5 years. I think it's really hard to move between the two in your head. When pregnant women tell me how many weeks, I'm like, I'm going to need that in months. I've no idea what you're talking about. So I just like to clarify. But I thought it was a nice round number, so a good one to share with you guys. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and about addiction, and about my journey through addiction and recovery, and how God can do amazing things. And there'll be a bit of practical stuff in there if you feel personally like that's something that may have sort of reared its head in your life, but also just in terms of supporting other people. And that was going to be it until about 8 a.m. this morning, when I just prayed and said, oh, if there's anything else you want me to chuck in last minute, let me know. And God was like, yes, this is what you're going to say. And I was like, well, that's really got nothing to do with what I planned to say. So I've tacked on a section at the end in line with what I believe God has put on my heart for you guys. And that's a little word about community. And I've kind of prepared a segue so that it flows, but I do kind of fear that what I'm doing here is two talks sort of bolted onto each other. So I'm just trusting that this is right, and we'll just see what happens. But we have something in common in that you don't know what I'm going to say, and I don't know what I'm going to say. So we'll just ride this together. But I do know that I'm going to start with the Bible, which I feel like is a pretty safe bet. And I'm not expecting a call. I've got the verse here. I am going to read from 2 Corinthians 12, 7-9. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Amen. So, I think we can all agree that none of us are the finished package. We've all got things. My thing is that I'm really bad at sticking to healthy routines. And when people are like, oh, what's your quiet time like? I'm like sporadic rather than consistent and amazing. And I really struggle with that. And I can also overload myself with things to do and then feel really sort of antsy and expect a lot of grace when I get snappy with the people around me. But those are kind of character defects. They're like splinters that you could kind of pull out of your skin with a little bit of work, investment, prayer. You can get through those things and come out the other side of them. What Paul's talking about here in this letter he wrote to the Corinthians is a thorn. And I thought, okay, I've arranged flowers a couple of times. I know what it's like to snag your skin on a thorn. It's not fun, but it's not the end of anyone's world. It's not that big a deal. So I wanted to look into this a little bit more, and I Googled it, and I did something I never thought I would do, and I checked what it was in the original Greek. And effectively, the word that they use for thorn in the sort of translations that we read could also be translated as a stake. And in this context, a stake is in a stake in the ground, a stake in a fence, a stake in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I wasn't allowed to watch, but I've got an idea. And that's huge. That's not just like a thorn. That's massive. That's debilitating. It was used as a weapon at the time when this is written. And to have it sticking out of your side is no small thing. And I guess what I've been thinking is, do we all have a thorn? And what does that look like? And when Paul spoke of his, he was really ambiguous. Some people think it might be a mental health problem, an addiction. People think it could be this sort of uncontrollable lust. But then also, he was beaten, he was arrested. Maybe we're talking about some sort of physical ailment that made life very difficult for him. But he doesn't say, and I think that's quite helpful, because it allows us to interpret and relate. And I certainly do, and I'll tell you about the thorn in my side, which is, as we've already covered, addiction. So I was 13 years old when I stopped going to church. Church wasn't for me, and I'm going to come to that in the community portion of this talk. I didn't like it. I felt judged, and my mum basically said to me, right, you're 13 now, so it's your choice. You can stay home, you don't need watching. Or you can keep coming. And I was like, yes, this is my chance, I'm free. And I stopped going to church. And instead, I, did all the teenager things. I grew up in South London. I started drinking quite heavily, which was pretty standard among my group of friends who weren't Christian, particularly. And actually, what I had always found and what I'd always valued was popularity. And it was so important to me that other people liked me and other people wanted to be around me and that I was fun and all of those things, that actually it became a bit crippling when I got around people. So alcohol presented a solution as far as I was concerned. Not that I necessarily became more fun, because quite often you might think you are, but you're not. But actually, it meant that I wasn't in my head about it anymore. So whilst all of those things were still there, I wasn't focusing on them. So I was very happy to continue drinking and drink through things. But the amount of alcohol you can get your hands on as a 13-year-old is quite limited, and I didn't have a huge amount of income. So I sort of trundled along, and at that time, I sort of hid in plain sight, because it was reasonably standard behavior for one of my friends to throw up on a night out, or at a party or something from drinking, as teenagers sort of finding their alcohol limits. So me and the way I felt about drinking wasn't obvious to anyone. Then fast forward a few years, I got into a relationship with someone who was also alcoholic, but he's now sober, a few years after me, but thank God, literally, thank God for that. But we just had this horrible, destructive relationship. It was very codependent. He was very controlling. There were elements which were quite abusive. We would get really drunk together and we'd fight, and you'd wake up and there'd be blood on the pillow and you can't even remember what you were arguing about, and it was horrific. And then I actually always used to say on my 22nd birthday, he left me, but I did find a diary, and it was actually a week later, so it feels a bit mean that I've been saying that for years. Around my 22nd birthday, he left me. He dropped me back at my mum's, and we'd lived together, and effectively had the dynamics of a marriage for the years that we've been together. Dropped me back at my mum's, and that was it. And I just felt so lost without the partner who told me who I was and what I was doing and what I should be and the decisions I should make. And I had to decide, what my identity was. And I just fell back on it being so important for me to be popular, because that was the last thing I remembered before that relationship had come about. So I decided I was a party girl. I got a job in hospitality where I headed up the sales for a group of restaurants in London, which is the absolute worst job you can do if you are a person with addictive tendencies, because part of that is entertaining, wining and dining people and drinking with them. And that sort of city lifestyle brought with it cocaine, which I thought, yeah, sure, why not? Haven't got anything else going on. And for me, cocaine was instantly gripping in a way that I think is very hard to describe for someone who hasn't experienced that level of intensity with an addiction. I do think all of us, and again, this is coming up later, all of us understand what it is to be addicted, because we all know what it's like to not want to do something but to do it anyway. To not want to eat that slice of cake, but then just think, oh, go on, I won't hate myself, and then hating yourself afterwards. And it's that, but times a million, when we're dealing with drug addiction. It's a really funny thing, because drugs were like my best friend. They allowed me what I felt were so many freedoms. I felt like I was able to be the person I wanted to be. I was able to socialize relentlessly. I was able to drink more when I was taking drugs because of the way they sort of chemically interact, and all of those things. But actually what I couldn't see was that I was becoming increasingly trapped. What I thought was providing my solution was just piling problems on top of the problems in the first place that were actually, manageable if I'd thought it through in the first place. And I know we've got youth here, and that's amazing. But it's a thing that people are presented with, and the best way, I don't want to be that, Christian person who, doesn't get how the world is, but the best way not to be, this is my advice for young people, best way not to be a cocaine addict is just not to take cocaine. So 100% of people who didn't take cocaine are not cocaine addicts. That's a stat. So, but the world happens, but that's what I'm praying into for you guys. I eventually did get sober. I called my sister. In the prodigal situation that we had going, she's the one who stayed and got no credit for it. She was the one who was, faithfully at home with my parents, going to church every week. She's the one who was given the choice at 13 and chose to keep going to church. She moved me in with her. She sent me into work with a pre-written resignation letter that I just had to sign and hand in. And she took me to church. I didn't get church. I still didn't get church. And I sat there next to her, and she had a handout like that. When they said, who wants prayer? She sat with her hand out praying that I would go and get prayer. And I was just like, I just don't really get it. It's just not really for me. And that was heartbreaking for her as a Christian who believes that. Sorry, I haven't broken it. As a Christian who believes that when someone reaches out, God reaches back, she was furious that she felt I'd turned up at church, I'd given it a try, and God hadn't sort of swooped in for me. But he was coming, so it's fine. I decided to move to Paris. I had a few friends who lived in Paris. I didn't speak French, so it'd be really hard to get drugs out there. And I just thought, I'll be away from things. This will be great. This is where my life will start again. And I just drank really heavily when I was there. I didn't take drugs for a long time in France, but I drank relentlessly, and I barely saw daylight. And I was in bed all day, blackout blinds down, and then out again at night. And then I started dating someone who worked in restaurants and who would finish his shift at midnight and would come and meet me with cocaine. And that's when my friends said, enough's enough. You've made this declaration, you left your job, you've moved to France, and now we can see that this is about to start all over again. So one of them suggested I went to church. I laughed out loud. What a hilarious suggestion. The other one said she had Googled and found a recovery support group meeting in Paris that was bilingual that she thought I should go to for cocaine addicts. And I went because, like, what great people watching, you know, to turn up, hear these people's dramatic stories. You know, there's this element of voyeurism about addiction that's like, that is so interesting. What was the worst thing you did, you know? I know why I get booked for these. No, joking. I don't. But that was it. That was what was in my mind. I was like, let's hear the nitty-gritty of it. And then I can go down to the pub afterwards and be like, I've been to those meetings, like in America, where they go, hi, my name's Lauren, da-da-da-da-da. And I could tell people the story. But when I walked into the room, I just cried. I just could not stop crying. And anyone who's been to a meeting for drug addicts in recovery will probably know that those meetings tend to be a demographic of men who are in their sort of 40s, 50s, who are on the whole, I can't speak for everyone, incredibly welcoming, but it's often not my sort of demographic. Whereas AA meetings, for example, is far more balanced in terms of genders. I walked in and there were 6 women in their 30s and 20s, all of whom, bar one, were only 3 months sober. And it was like seeing myself 3 months in the future. It's never happened since. It's God, I'm telling you. I don't need to tell you. It's God, right? And the way they spoke and the way they cared for me was just amazing. They took me for lunch afterwards, and my thing when I was using, really at my worst point, when I was, getting medical problems, I was having nosebleeds, I was, spots in front of my eyes, and I wasn't washing properly, or opening my mail, or washing my clothes, and every now and again, probably twice a year, I would have like a hot shower and moisturize my skin and just feel great that I had done something, I'd taken something initiative for myself. But it was so rare for me to do any kind of self-care. And at this lunch, this woman turned to me. I didn't ask this question, completely unprompted, and she said, do you know I moisturize every day now? And there's just like, to so many people who are in recovery even, that means nothing. But I was blown away. I was like, every day you moisturize? Like, it was so out of this world that someone would take that time on a daily basis to care for themselves, something just for themselves. And I knew how good I felt every time I did it. And I was like, I don't know what she's got, but I need it. I have to do this. It was that one sentence that convinced me there's something worth fighting for here. And how random. Like, only God can do that, because a million other things could have been said. So I decided to do it. And that was the last day I drank, the day before that meeting. That meeting was the 22nd of April, 2014. And I walked into a church. So that was on a Tuesday. So on the Sunday, I walked into a church, asked for prayer. The vicar said, yeah, sure. And as soon as I said what I wanted prayer for, he gathered around a team. He was like, stay there. And he got some people around. We're laying hands. And they really took me in, and church became such an amazing part of my community and my family, and the reason why I managed to establish and maintain recovery. And that's gonna sort of head us into the community portion. But before I do that, I'll just round off the addiction segment of this talk, which is basically, I subscribe to the 12 Steps of Recovery, which is not something that everyone in recovery does. It's a program laid out by the guys who set up Alcoholics Anonymous in the States. It was set up as a Christian program. Subsequently, the God element has been replaced by a spiritual element. So in those meetings, in order for them to be open for everyone, they will talk about a God as they understand him, or, a higher power of your choosing. For me, that higher power, that God is Jesus. And anytime I work through the steps with someone, I will also use the Bible and Jesus' teachings in order to do that. And steps 1 to 3, so the TED Talk that Adrian mentioned runs through those 12 steps and how valuable I think they are for everyone. So I'm not going to do that. But steps 1 to 3 are about identifying God, and I've said where I stand on that, and about handing over reins. And I think it's amazing that we've had so much talk in the sort of notices and the prayer and the stuff beforehand about freedom, because actually there's so much freedom in letting go of control, you know? And for me, addiction was a battle against myself. It was me versus me. I was locked in this fight between the person I wanted to be long term and the way I wanted to feel short term. And I couldn't reconcile the two. And the short-term version of me always shouted the loudest. And if the long-term version of me ever won, it was fleeting. And that's a horrific place to be in. But in recovery, one of the things we say is we stopped fighting. It's not that I wake up every day now and go, okay, it's me versus the alcohol and the drugs. Okay, and today I've won. And 2,700 days before this, I've won. Thank goodness, let's see what tomorrow brings. I don't fight. There's no fight anymore. It's not I get in the ring and I win against the enemy. It's that I'm not in the ring anymore. It's that God's in for me. Oh, it's always really affirming when people... My church is really straight-laced. No one claps anything, so I'm really vibing this. Stop it. Stop it. So that's it. When I fight, I lose. When Jesus fights for me, I win. No more fighting. That's it. He will fight those battles. And I think it sounds like quite an abstract thing, doesn't it? Like, oh, you know, you just let Jesus do it. You just hand over. And you're like, I think I've done that. I don't know if I have. There's no mysticism to this. It's literally identifying something that you're struggling in and going, yeah, Jesus, I don't think I can do this without you. Can you show me? Can you do it? Can I follow you in this? And it's that simple, you know? And it means praying that daily, weekly, hourly, depending on where you're at and what you're feeling. So yeah, that's the thorn in my side, and I don't believe God's taken it away. I believe that I am a recovering addict, not a recovered addict. I don't think if I'm going for lunch with these lovely people after this, if they poured me a glass of wine, it's not that I'm in a place where I can, you know, to me, recovered is, yeah, I can have that one glass of wine and leave it, like a lot of, I'm sure you guys can. I don't understand those people. But plenty of people can drink in moderation. I don't think I can. And maybe I can, but I'm not going to try. You know, that's it. I'm recovering. That's the thorn. It's still there, but through God's incredible grace, his power is made perfect within that weakness. And that is... I just can't get over a God who can take something so horrific and make it so beautiful. You know, that's the God we serve, and that's what God can do in your life. So, I'm going to do, this is where we sort of go into community and what this all looks like. I think the first thing it's really important to say is, I'm going to read a little passage from Brennan Manning's The Ragamuffin Gospel, because I think this is quite helpful. What I've just told you is a reasonably extreme story of addiction. I mean, in this context. In recovery circles, I'm like, someone called me a kindergarten addict once because of how less time I'd spent taking drugs, but far happier that way, believe me. But yeah, I think it can sometimes be difficult to relate when someone stands here and tells you such a dramatic transformation story. So I just want to read this passage, and I would love it if from here on in you look for the similarities between yourself and me rather than the differences. So, honesty is such a precious commodity that it is seldom seen in the church. Honesty requires the truthfulness to admit the attachment and addictions that control our attention, dominate our consciousness, and function as false gods. I can be addicted to vodka, or to being nice, to cannabis, or being loved, to cocaine, or being right, to gambling or relationships, to golf or gossiping. Perhaps my addiction is food, performance, money, popularity, power, revenge, reading, television, tobacco, weight, or winning. When we give anything more priority than we give to God, we commit idolatry. Just to be clear. Thus, we commit idolatry countless times every day. If you are in a place where you know, and you will know, because there'll be something kicking you from the inside right now, where something has taken too big a place in your life, and that could be substances, it could be food, it could be gambling, it could be spending, it could be compulsive skin picking, it could be codependency or love, or the idea of a marriage, or a child, or winning this, or getting that promotion, or making more money, or whatever. If it's taken God's place, that's not okay. And if it's taking away from your relationships with your friends, your family, your church, your God, then I think it's not crazy to consider that you're in a place of addiction. And I don't want everyone to leave here feeling like they need to check into the Priory. This is not, it's, actually just recognizing it is so important, particularly when it's so rife. We will go in and out of phases where something has such weight in our hearts that we put too much into it. So if you are in that place, then I want you to know a few things. You've never gone too far to pull things back, to make amends, to re-find that freedom. That is what Jesus died for. That is available to you. No one is too old. No one is too young. No one has done anything too horrific to come back into that place. No one does it alone. I don't know anyone in recovery who has sat themselves in a room and gotten themselves to a place of freedom. The bravest thing you can say is, help me. You can approach friends, family, your church leaders. You can turn up at one of those meetings. You can contact the NHS if that's appropriate. You do need a support network around you to tackle these things. And you definitely need people praying for you who know honestly what's going on. So definitely do that. If you have a loved one who struggles with addiction, that's horrific, and I'm really sorry. And they cannot get out of that for anyone other than themselves. I've seen people have their kids taken away, and you think, oh, that's it, that's going to be the catalyst. This is going to get them on the right path. If they haven't made that decision for themselves, they just can't make it for anyone else, and it won't stick. And that is a horrific realization. So yes, pray for them, support them, tell them, I love you, I want to support you. I know that this may take a long, long time. We're willing to wait. We believe in you, but you have to do something to help yourself. They have to turn up at that meeting. They have to say, help me. And that's not your responsibility, but yes, we all need to be praying for those people, and that is really important. But finally, here's the thing that I actually think God wanted me to tell you. So I don't know, maybe ignore all of that. No, I'm joking, don't. And that's about community. And, we were chatting in the car, just chatting with Julie in the car, about, so since getting sober, I've done a master's in addiction studies. And I've got a degree in neuroscience, so I've got this sort of dual science understanding and personal understanding of what addiction looks like. And I think we can all agree that prevention is better than cure when it comes to, well, probably everything, but certainly in this circumstance. And I know that there are a lot of families in this congregation, and something I get asked a lot is like, how do I make sure that my kid's okay? I've got a 10-year-old, and they're about to be in that place. And yeah, you can try telling them the line, the statistic about people who don't take cocaine don't become cocaine addicts, but not everyone appreciates that. But actually, there was a big study, really popular one, ages ago. I haven't got it with me, but I can dig it out if people want to check my working, where they looked at factors in someone's life which correlate to later life addiction, and then protective factors which make it less likely for somebody later to be in addiction. And things like coming from a difficult household, if there's a lot of tension, if there's a lot of arguing, if there's any kind of abuse, is a risk factor. Dropping out of school early is a risk factor. Having a delinquent peer group, being around people who take drugs or drink heavily early on, they're risk factors. That's not destiny, but they they make things a bit more difficult for people in those situations, and those people may not have the same resilience as somebody who's felt really stable through their upbringing. And particularly children have no say over how that all plays out, so need to be supported. A protective factor was church. If a child goes to church, that does serve scientifically, peer-reviewed research, statistically significant in their probability of suffering with addiction later. And there's going to be so many factors in that. You know, it's the regularity of turning up, and it's the community, and it's the way they're treated. And not everyone has a great experience at church, and that was mine. My experience at church was not great. I felt really judged. I didn't feel at home. I didn't get a good friendship group. I was beaten up at my church youth group on a Friday night once. My sister had to come and kick someone off me and drag me home. It was horrific. And I've got more of those stories, and there's no point. We know that church can go wrong. You know, I've seen pastors be abusive. I've seen people who, quite frankly, scared me in the way that they spoke to me about what was spiritually right and what wasn't, and people who took too much on themselves. And I think it's so important that what we offer to people in this church community is real community, is that someone can walk in here and never be scared to walk in here and always feel at home and always feel welcome and never worry that their lifestyle choices are going to exclude them from your community, because we show them Jesus' love before we tell them what they're doing wrong. And actually, if someone comes in and they are making choices which are hurting themselves and hurting their spiritual relationships and things like that, which we all do and probably all still are, because we're getting there, we're all work in progress, I find that when I pray about it, God calls me to challenge that person far less often than I think he wants me to. When I see something, it's so infrequent that God says, you're the person to go and tell them to stop doing that. Because actually what I'm called to do is love them, and that's it. And I, as a 19-year-old, just before I started taking drugs but was drinking really heavily, I walked into a Christian bookshop, and I won't say which one, just in case. And I would never have walked into a church, but I knew I was lost. I knew I was looking for something, and I was so desperate. I was so desperate for someone just to tell me how loved and valued I was and what Jesus could do for me. And I said, have you got a book on like sin and working through sin? Because by this point, I was all in. You know, I was drinking. Yeah, I hadn't touched drugs yet. It's drinking, smoking, living with my boyfriend, all of those things. And something wasn't sitting right. And she took me over, 19 years old, to the kids section and gave me a picture book called Who is Jesus? And I was like, it had like maybe a sentence a page. I was like, okay. And I bought it out of politeness, but I also grabbed another book called The Enemy Within, and she said to me, oh no, that's really quite serious, that book. And I was like, okay, I think I'm going to get it anyway. So I bought the two, and as I left, she said, by the way, Christians don't dress like that. Wow. I felt broken. And it was years till I went back and reached out to Christians again. You may think it, and if you do, I don't know, like sometimes you can't control your first thought, but your second has got to be love. It's got to be. And actually, us as individuals, there will be people in our lives who would never walk into a church. Maybe you're someone's Christian bookshop. Maybe there's someone who would never turn up here with you, but they know you come here and they just want to poke the bear a little bit. They just want to be like, why do you believe that? Maybe it'll come across nasty. Maybe it'll come across like they're mocking you. But if someone reaches out, if someone gives you that opportunity, just show them love. Don't tell them what they're doing wrong or what they'd have to give up or what Jesus would disapprove of in their lives. Introduce them to the amazing grace that comes. And maybe we pull people back. Maybe we show them that statistically significant church life that gives them community and foundation that they never had. You know, maybe we get less of these stories and more of the like, I could feel myself going off track. And then I just said to someone at work, like, but what do you do on a Sunday? And that was it, I was in. I just felt something I'd never felt before. You know, I feel like we are all a moving Christian bookshop. We are an accessible, smaller version of the church. And I just think you'd be so much more confident saying to each person here, like, but what do I do about that? Than you would walking up and coming to the front and asking for prayer. So I guess that's what God wanted me to say. I've got more notes, but I feel like that is what God wanted me to say. So I'll leave it there, but you have been incredibly hospitable, so I don't doubt that that is something that you extend to people who do come in. And I'm, just praying that this warmth that I feel in this room carries with you as individuals throughout not church, throughout all other parts of your life. And we can all be Christian bookshops. Thanks.